This is the Real Coaching Podcast. I'm Joel Filliol, back with Paulo Souza this week. How are you going, Paulo?
I'm good. How are you, Joel?
Not bad. What's the triathlon squad doing this week?
We're just working. Camp camp is always a constant here. We're just it's just the grind of the day to day. It's been going well. We've had some challenges with the weather and El Nino, but been pretty much everyone's rolling pretty well.
Yeah, imagine you can not used to the any sort of wet weather coming down there for Southern California.
Yeah, not at all. We had a week where it rained 4 days in a row, and that was a challenge for us.
Whoa, never before happened in California.
I, Ever since I've been here, definitely never happened before.
And on this end, we're still in Fuerteventura, rolling along. Couple weeks done, and with the arrival of Tommy's Affairs, we've got a lot of great pictures on the Facebook page. So I'll put a link to that. But we've got a lot of behind the scenes shots since Tommy's got a proper camera and setting things up. So I'll put a link for people who want to go and have a look at that. Um, and today we've got a great interview with a real coach, Michael Krüger, a Danish coach, been around a long time, and we have a great conversation with Michael. But first, we wanted to go through a few follow-up points. We've got a nice list of questions, and although the interview with Michael's pretty long, we thought we wanted to hit a few of these quick takes before we roll into that. So the first one, the first follow up was about our top 20 swim myths podcast, but really about the number 21, the famous number 21, the bonus that I added, which I'll remind people is repetition is your friend, variety is for the weak-minded, and interferes with the learning process. Repetition, repetition, repetition. So the question was really like if this concept could apply to other sports other than just swimming, and whether there's more to it. I mean, we didn't expand on this one, I don't think, very much. But what's your quick take on this one? Repetition useful, or is it boring and turn athletes off?
Yeah, I have a old blog about repetition as well, and and I think that there's a lot of value in repetition in being able to from week to week to adapt not only to a level of training load but also to a specific stimulus, and I don't see anything wrong if you from week to week in swimming, biking, and running, if you repeat sets, because they're going to be an opportunity to they're going to be an opportunity to improve from week to week, even in the context of the same set or the same session. Uh, a lot of the times, when, for example, if I'm on deck, I might just juggle things around or change things very slightly. Uh, but sometimes when I'm writing down workouts, juggling things slightly or making small differences uh, that don't change the repetition part of the workout of that block. I think it's very valuable. Uh, I When designing training sessions, and this is more particular for the swim, uh, I never go for the entertainment value of well, this is going to be really boring. This is going to be really fun. Sometimes athletes come out and say like, well, that was a really boring session when I thought it was interesting, and vice versa. But there's bringing it back. I think there's huge value in just uh, repeating stuff from week to week, just to get that consistency, and also uh, gives the athletes an opportunity to improve on their execution from week to week too.
Yeah, I mean that's it's an interesting one to think about in a number of contexts. But one of the ones that makes me think of is in our program we don't do any formal testing, but repeating the same types of sessions or even the same exact sessions is a great way to measure progress or where we're at in a program or in a build up. And it's not always seeing progress. Sometimes it's on a different week seeing the if you've done a similar set in the pool or similar workout, bike or run, you may feel different and be aware of that, and that can be very useful. And that can be indicating fatigue or indicating loading might be higher than expected, or RPE higher than expected. We've talked about that before. And so that can be very useful. If you're always going for variety, then you might be missing that familiarity and that being keyed into the sensations and the feedback that you get from repetition. And certainly over time, you ought to see progress. And so that's one of the key tools we use, rather than go in an artificial setting of a lab or needing to do time trials all the time, which my feeling is that many athletes, particularly senior athletes, they've got enough sort of stress in their program. We don't need and enough racing these days. We don't need to add too many of these time trial situations, but we have plenty of opportunity to evaluate just by repeating the same types of things. So we use that for sure. And the other one is, technically repeating the same kind of things. If there's a good stimulus there to be to be had and it's valuable, then deviating too much from that, you might actually dilute what it is you're trying to do. And I think there's a certain amount of acceptance. Like we're an endurance sport; it's cyclical. If athletes are bored, then maybe they need to think about their engagement of what actually they're doing, because there's plenty of ways to be engaged in what you're doing in a repetitive endurance sport, and some of it just comes with the territory.
Yeah, that aspect of repeating as non-formal testing, I think it's also important, and it's interesting because only recently I've had feedback from one of my athletes that he told me, well, looks like the swimming is really coming along really well for me. I've been seeing good progress on the Wednesday set that we've been doing, and the Wednesday sets, we did one of those today. The Wednesday set is just a descending set. It's long. It's like 5,000 yards long, and the athletes descend, in 4 or 5 rounds, something like that. And this gives an opportunity for the athlete to just test themselves or see where they're at, and not only the coach but also the athletes get a subjective measure of where they're at the moment and how their fitness is coming along.
And certainly, the coming back to the question, more than just swimming, you can repeat the same kind of run sessions, whether it be in a particular block or even year over year, if you find them valuable, coming back to them, or the same kind of cycling sessions. I mean, certainly they don't need to be exactly the same, but the same kind of theme, and you'll be able to still use that. So we tend probably to do it more in swimming, at least that I do. In terms of repeating the same kind of things, because we break everything down in swimming to such small pieces. So of course you're going to repeat those. But I think that's the same kind of thing. We do a lot of hill running at this time of year, and yeah, of course there's only so many ways to run hills. It might be different hills, but they're still hills, and they're still broken up in similar ways. And you can measure progress, and you can monitor how that's going. So yeah, I think it applies to everything, and it's useful, and it's part of endurance sport. So the next quick take, or the next point, we had a question a while back about power meters. All triathlon coaches and athletes seem to love power meters, but there's with the development of accelerometers now, there's a company called Stride that's making a running power meter, and thoughts on power as a meaningful metric for running. Is it possible? How is it similar or different than cycling? And this is a pretty new product. It was on the website today. Apparently there's a ton of testimonials. I didn't even know it was widely being used. Although products being given a free product never stopped anybody from giving a testimonial, it seems, in triathlon, whether they've actually used it extensively or not. But in any case, here we are with a potential new device, and as I said, triathletes love technology, so they're jumping all over this. What are your thoughts on accelerometers? Is this real power really, and is it useful in your opinion?
Yeah, I'm a little weary of the concept of a running power meter, since running economy is such a is such a, an important such an important aspect of running performance, and I can imagine that it's really easy to maximize your power, which is basically what you're trying to do when you're cycling. You're just trying to maximize the power that you're putting down for a particular interval or a particular session, and in running, you might be able to be running with a technique that maximizes your power, and through that you're going to be able to have worse running economy. So the link between performance and power is let's say a direct link in cycling, but I would say that running economy is the key in running. So I would say that when using a running power meter, what you're looking for is to minimize power for a particular pace, and that's not always going to be easy. Most or all of the research out there on running economy or running technique shows that when you tell athletes to on the spot change their running technique, their running economy actually gets worse, and that's that's data that's pretty old, and even in the circumstances of like the post method paper where there was a big intervention, and the technique of the athletes definitely changed, and the running economy for those athletes also got worse. So I would say that while and I keep saying that, like, cycling is a dumb sport. Your feet are attached to the pedals and they just go in circles. So the relationship between performance and power is going to be there. In running, it's not so, and running economy is the big determinant of performance. So I'm a little weary about the whole concept of having a running power meter.
I think those are some great points. I mean, as you said, and even clarifying in cycling, the efficiency between, or the economy between different cyclists doesn't vary that much, right? It's relatively small range. That's what you're saying. It's a bit dumb in that sense. So that even the concept of cycling technique is not really the same as running, for example, could be, and even technique, we're really talking about economy, and that varies a lot. And the whole concept that if you try to maximize your power running, you might actually run in a way that makes you less economical, which maybe, well, it's not maybe, it's counterproductive, isn't it? And so that the idea to if everyone goes out and tries to do power based sessions, they may actually be counterproductive to what they're trying to achieve completely. So I think there's definitely more study that's needed on this kind of thing. And the other concept, of course, is this is not measuring power in the same way that strain gauge power beaters are on bikes.
Yes.
These are accelerometers. And the technology is new. It's being applied in a lot of different sports, a lot of different settings, but it's an indirect method. And the companies obviously come up with an algorithm that can calculate it based on changes of motion and making that into a power metric. But that's very different than strain gauge direct measurements. So that's another point with this. But I think in our job, we've talked about it a lot. It's our, what we see, in coaching, and my job as a coach is to try to filter stuff. And, I think the jury is out on this kind of device. I think it's interesting. I think it definitely needs some more study. But just jumping into it, potentially there are pitfalls, as you've highlighted. And we need to understand a little bit more about what is the algorithm accurate? Does it make sense? What happens if you try to change your technique? Without going deep into technique, really a lot of running technique is simply style, and it's not related to economy because we're not even measuring economy. So I think there's a lot there. Athletes talking about, or coaches saying you should move this way, you should move your arms this way, don't move your head this way, move your legs this way, without any sort of direct measurement of actually what's happening. And, going into the research, as you said, Paulo, often that those kind of direct interventions have an effect of making economy worse or increasing the energy cost. And then, of course, the debate is over time, is that going to actually be better? But there's not really a ton of studies evaluating long-term technique change, is there? I think the question here is, when are we improving form and making technique worse? A lot of times, and again, more research. There's research where experienced running coaches were asked to evaluate running economy by looking at several athletes, and there was no correlation at all between what the coaches were seeing and the running economy of athletes. So even if, for example, in a lot of running workouts, or I will give some technique cues to the athletes, we always have to be careful in changing a lot of what the athlete is doing, because the potential to make their technique worse while looking better, it's going to be huge. It's going to be, that's what the research is telling us. So a lot of the times, from what I do personally, is I try to correct stuff to athletes that is a deviation from their technique when they're fresh and doing well. So basically, an athlete, for example, his head starts to lean back when he gets tired, then that's something that we can correct. An athlete starts to decrease his cadence when he gets tired, and that's something that we can point to. And a lot of the times that change, that making the athlete aware that of that is going to improve performance in the session, like right away. But making changes in technique, it's always dangerous. So bringing it back to this power meter for running, I think more study is required before it's determined to be a useful training tool or not. I think it's interesting. We'll see where it goes.
Mm-hmm.
So the third point, that the question we got, the follow up was really about young women and the number of injuries they seem to get, and the question was really, what are your thoughts on why this happens, and how to avoid it, and I suppose it may be thinking either from a junior under 23 perspective. We see a lot of young women in particular with a number of different kinds of injuries, whether it be bone injuries, stress fractures, or soft tissue injuries. But I think it's fair to say we see many injuries, and across all young athletes. But I think the question really here is directed to young women, and perhaps it's related to how we seem to advance young women perhaps faster than men in terms of the racing level and even the training level that
Mm-hmm.
that they end up doing earlier. maybe they achieve a little bit of success and they get sort of pushed on to the next level without really those fundamentals there. And maybe my quick take on this, it's always training load issues. They may not have the fundamentals of good biomechanics, good technique, training history, and those might lower the optimal training load for these athletes. However, it's simply giving them, every injury ultimately is due to too much loading to a tissue or to bone. And so therefore do better with a training loading and monitoring of training loading, and respect the history or lack thereof that young athletes have, male or female. Of course, there's particular issues with women, with bone density, etc., that make them more susceptible to bone injuries. But I think you keep it really simple. If athletes are in a program or having a lot of injuries, then the training load is too high, and that's typically acutely too high, meaning ramping up too much too quickly, too much intensity, not enough basics and patience.
Yeah, my first thought when talking specifically about young female athletes and injury risk, the first thought is obviously about the female triad and if there are any risk factors associated with that. I think that a lot for coaches sometimes when you see an athlete perform, we have a tendency to think that everything is great, everything is going great, and I think that with a lot of athletes and particularly with women, that's not always the case. Things going really well doesn't mean that everything is perfect or everything is going great, and there might be underlying risk factors that are going to surface later on. The second thing that pops into my head is are these athletes training too much, or are these athletes training not enough? I think I see a lot of very talented athletes that just because they're athletes, they're able to because they're talented, they're able to have great training performances. But also when we treat an athlete as injury prone, or we tend to just reduce the volume, reduce the training load. But then that means that the athlete, whenever she works out, she's going to be fresh and ready to perform really well. And any time that the intensity goes up, particularly with running, that's when the risk of injury goes up too. So I would say that one thing that's very important is also to control the intensity of training, even when an athlete is fresh. I think that injury prevention, how we prevent injuries, how we keep our athletes healthy. Like you said, it's got to do a lot with overall training loads, and with and athletes getting injured it's going to be related to are they ramping up their training too much? Are they doing a session that they were not prepared to do before? And a lot of those times, those are going to be training mistakes, coaching mistakes, and things that we need to learn from and hopefully not do it again.
Sure. I mean, a lot of the stuff you're talking about is really applicable to any athlete and any coach, aren't they? It's not just particularly about young athletes. So, yeah, I mean, it's a good topic to think about. It's a good topic to challenge our work as coaches, thinking about the training load, what's appropriate, how that changes, and as you said. So, good three points today. So the main topic, the interview we have with Michael Krüger coming up next, and Michael's a coach we've both known of for a long time. He's a long history in triathlon. He talks about some of his history, and then we get into some coaching stuff about his early days of starting to work with an athlete that many would know, Rasmus, who achieved quite a lot, and many of the other Danish athletes. Denmark has been traditionally very strong in triathlon. He talks a little bit about that, why, and some of the coaching stuff about how do you start with a new athlete, when is the right time to end with athletes, and then how do coaches need to learn and adapt in the modern environment, and a little bit about the squads and different contexts that we're working in. So great talk with Michael. He's definitely a real coach, and we're happy to have him on.
Yeah, looking forward to listen to Michael. Is, like you said, he's been around for a long time. His athletes have always really good levels of performance. And so I'm looking forward to hearing his thoughts.
Hey, Michael.
Hello.
How's it going there today?
Oh, it's very nice. I'm still in skiing camp, and it's the most beautiful day we have had so far. So very cold, sunny, and a snow. So It's just nice to look outside the window and see the Alps. It's
the Alps.
Amazing.
Yeah. So whereabouts are you?
Yeah, we are in very close to the border between Germany and Austria, in a town called Leutach, which is very close to Seefeld. It's a famous cross-country skiing destination.
Nice. You've always used a bit of skiing in your training, haven't you?
Yeah, we have done that for a very long time already. I think we started maybe 2003. I started with Rasmus.
Yeah.
Something around that, or maybe even before that, because I've been to skiing camps already with Torbjørn and Rasmus together, and we always had really much success with that.
Yeah.
So especially for the biking.
Yeah.
So I continue that, and the athletes enjoy it, and I'm here with 4 professionals at the moment. So with Camilla and Martin, and then Stefan and Horst. I mean, we are all different in level, but yeah, we get a lot out of it, and especially for the older athletes, which have been training for so many years, it's also mentally a nice break. And I think that like the season can get very long if you start training whatever in November, and you're maybe racing from January to November, and you're doing all the same shit all the time.
No kidding.
Biking and running,
Yeah. Do you remember a guy called Tom Evans, a Canadian guy from Penticton? He used to cross country ski a lot because Apex Mountain just up the hill from Penticton, and he wouldn't ride in the winter. He said, I couldn't be bothered to ride the indoor trainers, so I'll just ski. And I always thought his condition was excellent when he finally got on the bike. It didn't feel at all like that he had taken 3 months off cycling, or 4 months.
Actually, I mean, there are 2 different techniques. Either you do the classical cross-country running, skiing. This is more like for the running. The skating technique, which is extremely for the bike.
Yeah.
Very good for the bike, because you're working so much on your glutes.
Yeah.
And you get so strong in your glutes and your hamstrings. And then when you can go like, I've been with some of them just directly more or less from skiing to racing. And they will bike like hell.
Yeah, very strong.
Yeah.
So, and you're getting in some skiing yourself from the sounds of it.
Actually, I've done a 3-day block now myself. Normally I don't train that much anymore, but I have entered for a cross country race on Greenland in the spring.
Right.
Which is 160k almost on 3 days. So I need to prepare a bit. So I've done a little bit of testing now, 3 days with 50k each. Nice. So I'm pretty busted. I just came in half an hour ago from 50k of cross-country.
Perfect. So your mind is full of oxygen then.
I'm full of coke now.
Yeah.
So
very good.
Very good. So I'm really ready.
Yeah, very good. Well, thanks for doing this. Like all of the stuff we've been talking about so far is good, but I wanted to get into your background. You've been in triathlon a long time, haven't you? Many years.
Yeah, I think since 1990.
Yeah.
I did my first race myself in 1990.
Mm-hmm.
As like I came from totally different sports like handball, soccer, or football and tennis.
Mm-hmm.
But the problem was that all the other guys I was in the team with, they didn't want to train that much. So I decided at one point, okay, I need to find some sport where I can train as much as I want.
Right.
So I picked up running, I think in '89 after high school.
Yeah.
And and then did a marathon within 8 months of training or something like that, and then it continued like that, and then it was like very very fancy at that moment in Denmark. Like triathlon was hitting the first tide, first high time in Denmark. So I started out with triathlon, and then actually started to study in Germany and went into a club, and that's how it started then.
So how did you transition into coaching from that? So you were racing, you're doing your own racing, and I know you continued that for within your coaching even, but what was the first transition point to coaching?
Yeah, the first transition point was that I started studying sports science. So at the same time when I picked up triathlon, so it was at the same time. So but when I started sports science, I thought I was going to be a coach in whatever team sports. But then because I had so much fun with my triathlon, it became the way I thought. When within 1 year I said, okay, you're going to be coaching triathlon. The only problem was there were no jobs for triathlon coaches at that point. So I said, oh, wow, maybe you're studying the wrong thing now, because you're so much into triathlon, but there are no jobs. So how are you going to do? But so I had this like doing my own career on that level I had, studying sports, and then maybe it took only 2 or 3 years. I think in '93 I started coaching also with like local clubs I was in, becoming the swim coach and then helping them out. And I think already in '94 in my team, we had a guy called Andreas Niedrich. He's still racing. I guess you maybe have heard his name. He's
sure.
Yeah, and the manager of the team came to me and said, "Hey, Michael, we have this talented guy here, but he's totally crazy and he can't handle the training. Can you help him? Maybe give him some advice." And then I started out helping Andreas. He became the first elite athlete I coached. It only lasted 1 year because he became so fast that 1 year that he made the national team, and then the national coach took over.
Right.
But that was like the first elite experience I had with coaching, and all others before that was like on the local team I was in. Then it emerged with some local athletes, and then the next big step was like I think '98. I was more. I had been done with my studying, but I just kept it going so I could train and work and whatever. And I decided that '98 would be probably my last season. So I made some connections back to Denmark because I was still living in Germany at that time. And then in the end of '98, I think my Danish team asked me whether I could coach Rasmus Henning. They had a talent called Rasmus Henning. Sure. And I said, okay, I'm going to do that. And I moved back to Denmark half a year later and picked up coaching Rasmus in '99. And then things went really fast. I got a job in the federation, first as a consultant and then a junior coach and then coaching Rasmus. And things went really fast from that on. And then I was in the federation for 14 years with a lot of different. I had a lot of different hats on. I was coaching, I was performance director, and then sometimes both at the same time, then forth and back. But the last many years, I primarily coached.
So the beginning with Rasmus there, I mean, that must have been a special relationship. I mean, he had some amazing performances, and it sounds like you were there from the early days, really, of his career.
Yeah, I was the first triathlon coach he had. And then he didn't have any other for the first 11 years of his career. I mean, of course he had a lot of swim coaches, and he had had a long career in swimming, not being a great swimmer, but being a decent swimmer. And the fun thing was that the first 1 or 2 seasons, I could still beat him, but that disappeared very fast. It went really fast. So that's like, I think that's what it does when you have real talent. People, they emerge like within half a year. You can just see they're going off like rockets. And he was very good in listening, doing the right things. And of course, when you then have one athlete and people can see, oh, he's doing really good, then other athletes will come around. I was then a national junior coach, and I have still some athletes, or most of the athletes I coached at that time are still racing, one way and the other, and some are still racing professional. And it didn't take long. I actually coached Marie Overby for the Sydney Olympics.
Yeah, I
also,
remember her. Yeah.
For 2 years, she had a good year. She didn't have a good Olympics because she was injured, but she really had good racing in 2000. Before she stopped, I think, 1 or 2 years later due to heavy asthma. So these were the two first really talented and high profile athletes I had, and then, well, things went on from there.
You talked about sort of the first wave of Danish triathlon, I guess. You're referring to the first kind of top athletes that came through. But of course, when I was thinking about speaking with you, you have to ask, why Denmark has historically had so many great athletes. There's just so many. The list is very long considering the population. And it sounds like as you've been there since the early days in terms of coaching, do you have some insight in why that is? Why for a small country to produce so many great athletes?
Yeah, I think it started already before my time. I would say it started in the late 80s already in Denmark, where we had tremendous talent, really, especially on the male side. In the late 80s, we had 3 or 4 professional athletes at that time, racing in France, where the money was at that time, and they had a great, just great spirit. And I think Denmark is a cycling and swimming nation. At that time, in the 80s, also a running nation that disappeared a little bit. But so I think, in the beginning, it was like people were just crazy. They were training like hell, and it was like people were drawn to triathlon in the 80s. So there were just coming a lot of talented guys into the sports. And then when I started racing, it shifted a bit towards the female side. So in the beginning, the first half of the 90s, we had so many great female athletes, really like world class. I mean, I think we had 3 or 4 at the same time in the first half of the 90s, winning European championships and medaling at world champs and so on. And then when it shifted to become drafting before the Sydney Olympics, things changed a bit, and like the long distance became big in Denmark, because like people didn't like the drafting to begin with, and it was very different because there are different demands. You can't afford to have a weaker swim, and you win the races on the run. So we had a big shift towards non-drafting racing mid-90s, and somehow the federation managed to do both. I think the Danish Federation is one of very few federations that support the long distance athletes too, if you have success, and also in the emerging athletes. So it's not only, they train towards the Olympics and they do like all the speed stuff, but you won't be dropped if it's clear that you're never going to make the Olympics. They will support you some way or the other. That's one of the explanations.
Yeah, that's a unique point, isn't it? I of course I recall having kind of worked with you with Helle Fredriksson and the sort of her change, but also observing other athletes that I can't. I've worked with a lot of federations over the years, and I can't think of too many that support long distance in the way that Denmark has done. As you say, like, sure, if you're already very good, then you might get named to the national team or given a small amount of support. But Denmark is doing more than that for long distance athletes.
Yeah, it's not that many, but there are a few of them. They are really supported, and like they having access to the physios of Team Denmark and so on, and giving some subsidies, some money, and yeah, and I think that's a good way, especially for a small country. I mean, you can't expect, if you have a population of 5 millions, you can't expect a nation to have like top triathletes in the Olympic circuit all the time. So, well, we have been represented in every Olympic Games so far in the triathlon, and we will hopefully also be in Rio. It looks like we will qualify one or two. I say we. I mean, I'm still connected somehow to the federation, though I'm not working directly for them anymore. And but if you want to keep up in an environment, I mean, you need some people to train together. And I think it's very much about the environment, having some clubs or having the national team, or doing it the other way, like which is very popular up on time, like the way you do, having an international squad. But that will often be like the top pros or the ones that are just at the doorstep to make it really to the top level.
That's a really interesting point, actually. Thinking about it, how so many countries, they face the same problems, especially with small populations, and integrating long distance makes a lot of sense to keep a great environment and keep a training group and a culture for young athletes to come into, perhaps later. Whereas if there's so much sort of exclusive focus on IT racing and in almost every federation that's potentially a gap, so that's very interesting, I think.
Yeah, I mean, the focus, the main focus for the Danish Federation is also the Olympics, but they know, well, we are not going to have 5 athletes in the Olympics. So, but it takes more than one athlete to have an environment. So, yeah, I mean, it's different, but like I think one of the topics of talk is like this: what is going to change with coaching and all the international groups, which is very interesting at the moment because it's changing very fast. And I think you got some German-speaking athletes for the first time this year. Yeah, and like the German Federation has been very concentrated on like keeping their cards tied to their body, like having their athletes training in their national training center. But even the Germans now have resigned and given up and said, okay, the trend seems to be whatever international training groups are working better than national training groups. Mm-hmm.
I mean, certainly it's difficult. When I think of that from my perspective, it's difficult to keep all of your top athletes in one group, and the international group is another group, if you like. But I mean, it's possible within the countries to do that. But I think that's a challenge that I see in many countries is when if you've got one training center, if you're centralized and you've got all of your best athletes there, it's challenging. That's a challenging environment to maintain, and some athletes perhaps opting out, and we talked with Dan Lorang, the German national coach, in one of our earlier episodes, and I think our partnership or that facilitation allowed that to happen. I think with maybe in the past you're right, though it may not have happened, and certainly many federations, for a variety of reasons, like to hold on to their athletes, or as you say, keep their cards close to their chest. But it will be interesting to see where coaching is going in that perspective, and and even just listening to a little bit about your career, because you've changed roles a number of times, and from as you say, from wearing different hats. So there isn't, and as you also said, there isn't just one job, is there? I mean, maybe it hasn't changed that much in the sense that there are not many jobs for triathlon coaches, so you have to be able to be flexible and work in different environments.
Yeah, I mean, they had a lot of coaches now. I mean, compared to the beginning of the 90s, I can remember one coach in Denmark, and now there are maybe 100 that call themselves coaches. And because like the age group coaching has become that crazy big in many countries, so more or less everyone who has done an Ironman, finished a decent Ironman, starts up coaching to giving advice to some others. But when it comes to elite coaching, there aren't maybe not that many. maybe in Denmark we are about 5 coaches doing elite coaching. But also I'm coaching 12 athletes at the moment, and like half of them are Danish and the rest is international. Well, there are Germans, there are whatever, Americans, Luxembourg, whatever. So I think, yeah, and with all the possibilities we have now, like conversation via Skype or FaceTime or whatever, everything, it's less complicated now, and you can do a lot, and people can afford more, we can go to camps and so on. So it gets easier to get international. But what you said, like about the groups, if the mixed groups is like the rivalry is not that big if you have international groups. If you have the national training center, they are all fighting for the same spots, for the championships, for the Olympics, for the same sponsors. They have to share the same coach all the time and all this. That's the challenges you were talking about. And that's, I think it's very healthy to have international groups. And I think we will see a lot more of that coming into the future.
In the future, yeah, you can see that as a trend. I mean, the challenge, I think, coming back to developing as a coach, thinking like, how do you develop the, like you're talking about the difference and the number of age group coaches, and certainly it's true worldwide, isn't it? There are many, many age group coaches, but then equally, you could say there are very few elite coaches, however you define that. There are many people that are interested in elite coaching, but the question that that we get in this podcast and that we're interested in exploring is, well, how do you develop into an elite coach? Because everyone's got a different story, and that's an interesting way, because it seems very unique. But if you were to advise somebody if they wanted to get into elite coaching, what would you say? What would you say to do?
Yeah, it's interesting because I'm educating for the Danish Federation some of the coaches. They're probably becoming elite coaches, and they ask me the same, and I say, well, get out, find some athletes and make them fast. Yeah. So you simply to work. There's so much potential out there. There's so many athletes having potential. Mm-hmm. So it's just about getting out, get associated with them, and get on training, and then you will emerge. It's quite easy at that. I think that's the best thing you can do. I mean, you can study all the books, you can read everything, but that won't make you the best coach, because it's all about experience. Mm-hmm. I mean, I've been coaching for more than 20 years now, and well, we still develop, and I still learn things every day. Every time I get in, there are different perspectives, there are different problems. Often they are the same problems, but also the same challenges, but then different challenges. And then, you work on the problems and you get more wise.
Yeah, I mean, there's
Can
no.
Can you hear me, Joe?
Yeah. There was a little bit of static, but it seems okay now.
Yeah.
Can you hear me? Yeah. Yeah, so I mean, there's no substitute for just getting out and coaching, and I suppose you didn't say it explicitly, but being on deck and in person, and whether that be club environments or whatnot. I mean, because online coaching is so easy to do, but perhaps development though has to be still in person, and what we might call real coaching, right?
Yeah, I mean, I've listened to some of the other podcasts you did. And of course, like the ideal situation is being on deck all the time, or more or less all the time. That's not the way I do in the moment, because it's not possible, because people are all over the place, and I'm not traveling that much that I did when I was still in the ITU circuit. But you have the possibility to talk to people in person, on the phone, or via Skype or FaceTime. You can see them, you can see the expressions on the faces. And I mean, I have had very long training relationships with most of my athletes, and that makes it a bit easier. But in the beginning, when you get into a new athlete, you have to spend really much time on getting into the DNA of that person.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And yeah, getting to know them. Yeah, perhaps it accelerates. I've often thought about that. With a new athlete, when you're learning about them, the process is so much faster if you can watch them go through, a training cycle or even some challenging training sessions, and then you really learn, don't you, where they're at.
Yeah, you learn their mental strength and weaknesses when you can see how they act, like when they're really challenged, and you can see their body language. Well, they tell you they are tired, but if you see them walk and they're still fresh, or maybe they're not that tired. And the other way around, others will say, oh, they're okay, and they're more or less limping all the day. So these are the things you can't see if you are not on deck. So and then to overcome that, well, yeah, you have to think about if you do long distance coaches, which I do with some of the athletes, and I've done with now you're with Jordan again. I did like long distance coaching with Jordan for many years, very successful, but it takes also a special kind of people to do that. They must be very good at communicating. Yeah. And you must be very sure they are speaking the same language, not English or German, but they know what if you say, well, go hard, then they know what you mean when if you say go hard or take it easy or go to bed, so that it needs to be the same language.
And indeed, I even think contrasting, where you are now and even the abilities and skills you develop learning to read athletes, as a beginning coach wouldn't have those skills, but then but might be tempted to go into the online world. It takes time to develop those skills, doesn't it?
Yeah, and you need to find the right questions. And if you've heard the same answers, sometimes you know how to evaluate them. And I can be very persistent, asking the same things over and over again to make sure that they understood what I wanted them to understand. And there have been quite many athletes I turned down to coach because I thought, oh, well, I guess the chemistry between us is not perfect. We're not talking the same language, or the expectations are too high or too different. I mean, some people call you and think you can turn everybody into a world champion, but that's not the way it is. I mean, you can give it a shot. And so, yeah, you have to get that right to choose the right people to work with. Well, I have maybe the luxury that more people are asking me to work with me than emerging coaches. So I can have a quite good success rate with doing long distance coaching or online coaching, whatever, and just seeing people for some shorter periods of the year. But whenever I start up with a new athlete, it takes me weeks to get in to the brain of that athlete.
I mean, you made a very interesting point about how you evaluate athletes, and I think whether you will connect or be able to communicate, because I think that's something that every coach faces. When you have the opportunity potentially to work with someone, you have to both parties have to make that evaluation of well, will we be able to work together? And on one hand, I always like to think, but I can work with anybody, but perhaps that's not true. That you have to find a common ground, and if the expectations aren't correct, then that could lead to problems down the road. So you go through a process like that when you have a new athlete or a potential new athlete.
Yeah, I'm talking about nothing than expectations for the first hour of an interview. Mm-hmm. I want to know where are they now. I mean, you look at the results list, you can see what level they are racing in or racing on, and then you ask them, so where do we want to go, and how fast do you want that process to be? And then you have to agree on, okay, maybe this is going to take more time than you think. I mean, sometimes I wouldn't say you're lucky, but sometimes it works out and it goes really fast and you work together for 3 months or half a year and you have great success. But at other times, maybe it takes 1 year or 2 years. I mean, yeah, like an example is Helle, which you are coaching now, Helle Fredriksson. Mm-hmm. When you started out coaching, the first year or the first 2 years weren't without problems. and then the big success came. So things take time sometimes, and then you have to be patient.
Oh yeah, I mean that's a great case of how it took time, and from different cultures it takes time too, and to learn sort of the communication styles being different. I mean that could be as individual as it would be different cultures, but certainly the persistence there to find the common ground and to be able to communicate effectively. And on the other side of that, how do you know when a relationship is reached its end point or its limitations, or moving an athlete on? We've had that kind of question come before, and certainly every coach has been in that situation where you're wondering to yourself, or the athlete is it time for a change? So how do you think about that?
Yeah, it's very interesting now because we have been coaching some of the same athletes, and like Jordan Webb and Helle Fredriksson. And with these two athletes, they have been two of the athletes when I came to a point that I said, I think I can't help that athlete anymore. Mm-hmm. And with Helle, it was that early at, I think, 2010. We were in Hungary for the World Championships, and Helle had a really bad race, and we were both very disappointed, and I suggested her to go for another coach, but she turned it down at that point, and then took 1 year, and then she took it up and changed over to you. Mm-hmm. And the same was with Jordan. I think it was 2013. We had come to a point where he had been extremely successful. But I felt that he needed a change, whatever it was. I would call it the setup. So I look very much into the setup for athletes. I say, okay, is your environment you're dealing with, all the problems, challenges you have. Now we have been together for some years, had great success, but I felt it was time for a change. And same story, Jordan didn't want to do it in the first place. So we kept on coaching another 9 months together, and then he took the decision. So the funny thing is that for the athletes that have been in a relationship with the coach for a long time, it seems to be harder to face that, it's time for a change. Of course, it depends on what type of person you are. I mean, there are some athletes are changing coach every 5 months, but other coaches, they stay with the coach for some time. And how to evaluate, I think it's when you feel like the communication might be not that fruitful anymore, and you can see that the results are maybe not coming that easy like you want to do. Mm-hmm. And then you have to be open enough to say, okay, we have come so far, maybe suggest to change. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I think that has been the only athletes when I did it in time. Mm-hmm. We didn't change them immediately, which was a mistake. We shouldn't. When you first get that feeling that it's time for change, you should do it immediately, I think, whether it's the athlete or whether it's the coach.
Yeah, I mean that's an interesting one as well, because occasionally you'll get an inquiry from an athlete, and I ask about their situation, and it's clear that they have some interest in making a change, but then, as you say, they in some cases maybe they don't for some time. But in hindsight, in many cases anyway, that it appears that the best time is when they're thinking about it, and rather than to go through maybe a year or some months, maybe not committed to totally, or there's some belief, or there's some block there, but there's a reluctance to do it. And as you say, it's harder in the long relationships because you make those investments in each other, and you become attached in a way to each other. It can be sometimes intense relationships, but equally they all reach an end point of one way or another, don't they?
Yeah, it's really like I said in the beginning, I've had really long-term coaching relationships with most of my athletes, and then you really get attached. And I also realized that sometimes it's better not getting too much attached, because then it gets tough to get separated in one way or the other way. So then you have different feelings about it, instead of being objective and say, okay, we're not having the success we need. Come on, get on with something different. And but the challenges can be very different, like from person to person. I mean, it can be just whatever, having family, having children, which makes a big challenge. And then, well, if you have one big change in your life, sometimes you need another big change to get the whole situation evaluated. There might be problems within the training group especially for the female athlete. Sometimes it can be very stressful to be many female athletes, especially from the same country, because they are fighting for the same spots. And I've seen that all from many different nations having big problem with that. And but the challenges can be very different. And well, of course, coaches have challenges too. I mean, you might have bad patches in your life or be very stressed and can't give the attention to an athlete that the athlete needs. And well, then it's time for a change, maybe.
Yeah. I mean, it's certainly on the women's front, certainly groups is interesting, and we're hearing you say that within the same country, and I can certainly say, even when people from different countries, the other day, yesterday, Sunday, we did some group efforts, only men and then only women, and it's very different how the men behaved on the bike in the group and how the women behaved. As you can imagine, the competitiveness and just everything is a little bit different, and yet it has to be managed differently. So you can't escape it completely from not competing for only the same spots, but certainly, as you say, different challenges. With different people. And when I even reflect some of the relationships that from my point that reached an end, there was also maybe even a different kind of motivation. You have to have enough motivation, or it perhaps isn't the right motivation, isn't it the right word in its entirety, but there's a certain drive to help somebody, and that can fade, and then that's a sign that that you as a coach need to change. But thinking back to some of the longer relationships, as you said, because it is actually somewhat rare now in the quasi private professional kind of world. There, as you say, some athletes change coaches every 5 months, and others long time. I was reading recently about Brent McMahon and Lance Watson, who have been together for so many years. I forgot, it's more than 10 years, in following his transition from junior to Ironman. But you were with Rasmus a long time, and some others. It must be interesting to watch that relationship and that dynamic change over time with an athlete like Rasmus, from the early days to the big successes he had.
Yeah, the coaching changes if you have known people for that long time. Like for Rasmus, it was very, very intense, maybe for the first 8 or 9 years. And then after the Beijing Olympics, it was time for a change. And I said to Rasmus, okay, you're done with Olympics now. We were quite clear that he had to change for the long distance. At the same time, I was coaching Torbjørn Sindballe, and I had the problem, like they were the big rivals. So far, it had been no problem for many years, because one was doing long distance, the other one was the Olympic star. And then suddenly I knew, well, in 2009, I will have 2 rivals on the long distance. And how am I going to manage that? And I actually said, oh, maybe it's time that they both get another coach. So I'm rid of that problem, and I can concentrate on some of the other athletes. Well, it ended up being like more an on and off relationship with both athletes. So they were so experienced, and it ended up being like, well, I've been coaching them maybe for 4 months and then giving them a break where they were not racing. It wasn't that important. Maybe for 3 months they could do whatever they like, and whenever they knew, okay, now it's 3 or 4 months to race time, they will turn up and say, Coach, could you please make a training program? And that worked out for quite well for some time. But yeah, I think every relationship has an end, and it gets more tiring. So you need the coach needs time off from the athlete, because the athlete doesn't do the things you want to do them, even though you've told them 100 times. And on the other side, the athlete then doesn't want to listen to the things you have told them 50 times, and then comes somebody else and tells exactly the same, and they do it immediately. Yeah? And that's what when you know that, okay, yeah, we need a break here.
Yeah, that certainly resonates with me as well. When you get a new athlete and they're so keen and motivated and listen to everything, versus the ones that have been around a while. Not that people that question things are necessarily less coachable, but it's different dynamic, isn't it? And it can be filled with enthusiasm about a new athlete, where someone that's been around a while, makes you wonder about that. But another point that you just highlighted there, sort of the difference between the short course and the long course coaching and racing and preparation even. And it's something that you have a unique experience because you've done very high level at both, and very big success in both. And how do you sort of see the challenges being different or similar or between the two in terms of coaching and preparation?
I would say, because at the moment, like long distance in terms of qualifying, like for Kona, it's more or less copying the system of the ITU. So before the new qualifying system came, it was very much different because it wasn't much less stressful for the long distance. You didn't need to travel to like every continent to get some points to qualify, whatever. You could concentrate on very few races. No problem. You would qualify by doing the race when you were ready. The stressful part about ITU coaching is like a lot of races. If you are not amongst like whatever top 20, then you are on that level. Okay, I'm injured for half a year. I will do one race or two races. I will be back and I'm qualified. But if you're not in the top 20, it can be stressful and very difficult. Well, should we race? Should we not race? Should we train more and then rely on being really good, or should we do more races to be sure to qualify? Quite stressful, I would say. And then the long distance, well, you can have more patience. There are different levels of racing where you can have success. I mean, you can even make a living if you are not a top pro. You can't do that in the ITU. If you don't get funded from your national federation, well, you are like a poor bastard. training like hell, and you're dependent on what your federation is going to pay or not. For long distance, you can pick some smaller races, make some prize money, and there's a much bigger market for the whole sponsor thing is totally different, long distance versus short distance. But it also makes it more complicated for the pros on the long distance because they have other obligations. I mean, some of them have really to work hard to make their sponsors happy. A lot of appointments, advertising, whatever, all the social media, which can take very much time. And I mean, I haven't done like ITU coaching since 13 now on top level. I still have some under 23 guys, and I hope one of them, will be in the 2020 Olympics. Probably not with me as a coach because he will then have the national coach next year, I guess. But it is different. But sometimes maybe one shouldn't think that it is so much different. I mean, it's still about swimming, biking, and running. But it's maybe more like very many mental things, I think, and technical things. That there are small technical things in the ITU races that have great importance that you maybe not need to focus on the long distance. I mean, actually, it's very obvious. You have to be in the front in the swimming in the ITU. If you are not, it's going to be, uphill all the way.
Sure.
I mean, especially... I mean, now we had a flat Olympics in London, but now it's going to be hilly for Rio. And if the Brownlees are in the race for the men's and Gomez, and you're not within 20 or 30 seconds out of the water, I think your race is done. And so you better concentrate on being a fast enough swimmer. And this is the funny thing, like the ITU racing can change a bit from Olympics to Olympics depending on what Olympics is coming up. Mm-hmm. So we had the Athens Olympics bike course, which was really extreme. Mm-hmm. And we knew before already, well, it's not going to be 30 guys in for the run. It's going to be 8 or 10. And that's what happened. And Beijing was also a challenging course, but somehow the only one interested in doing it really hard was Alistair Brownlee, but he was still, didn't have that level at that year already. So it ended up being a big group, despite it was a really tough course. The women's race was like blown to pieces. Mm-hmm. And so I think it's going a little bit in waves, depending on what is coming up, what kind of athletes. I mean, you always wish to have the complete athlete, like the one that swims perfect, runs perfect, and is strong on the bike. But not everyone is, and you work hard on to make them complete athletes. I mean, I guess you're in the situation now with Mola and Murray that, they are great runners and they bike nice, but they often have the problem that they are not in the first group in the swim. And then, like, the tactics it's different, and you're a little bit dependent on what are the guys in front of you doing.
Definitely,
You can't control it all yourself. Otherwise, if the first out of the water, you have so far you have everything under control. And so there's a lot of tactics in ITU racing that you can't control. Where on the long distance, there's also a lot of tactics, but it's more maybe an internal mental game. Mm-hmm. You have to take some decisions in racing. Am I going to change or am I going to do my own thing? In ITU racing, you can't do your own thing. I mean, then you won't win. So that's I think the tactics and the mental game is important in both disciplines, but it's a different game.
That makes me think of kind of Kona and sort of getting on the bus early in the bike, and in terms of there is a tactic there, isn't it? But you have to make a decision, and of course later it's very much different. In terms of the mental game. How have you seen Kona evolve, or has it evolved? Is it the same athlete that could win 10 years ago that could win now, or is it different?
It's different because there's so much more talent now. The fields are getting much more packed and stacked. So there are many more guys up there that can make whatever, top 5, top 10. Maybe it's always, before you go into a race, there are maybe only 3 or 4 men that can win that race, or women for that sake. But now, back in the days, there were maybe 15 that could make the top 10. Now maybe there are 40 that can make the top 10, and there are maybe 20 that can make the top 5 on the right day. And about the bus, that's a funny thing. I mean, there are more people struggling with hanging on that bus than that are having a good day out of it. But it's it's very likely that the one who's going to win will be in that front group all the day and will make some move at some point. And then there are some very special bike skills, like Sebastian Kiele and some others, that have the opportunity to close that gap. But most of the especially male athletes, and now it's becoming a little bit the same for the female athletes, but the field is not that dense, is that the group is becoming bigger and bigger, and so many athletes are struggling to hang on that front group. And for most of the athletes to have success, which doesn't mean to win, but maybe to make it top 10 or top 5, it would be a better decision just to do their own thing, because they simply go so fast. I mean, they go 340, 330 watts for the first 45 minutes. And that's quite intense. I mean, that's what they do in average in ITU racing. But in ITU racing, it's you do 400 watts and then you do 150 watts, and it changes all the time. But your average won't be that high. But it's not very efficient to do 330 watts for the first hour, and then pedaling with 220 watts for the last hour. And but that's actually what's going to happen for whatever 90% of the athletes.
So you would advise someone, well, in many cases, like to race their own race. Is that basically what you're saying?
Yeah.
Or yeah.
I mean, if you don't want to win, if you want to win, yeah. But it's about expectations. I mean, I don't have 10 people going into Kona for the win. It's like when I do like the talk with the athletes, it's very much about what is the next step in your career, and you don't go from being number 40 to be number 1. So the next step is coming into the top 20, top 30, then top 10. It's very rare that you have like athletes like whatever Jan Frodeno. Okay, he's coming as an Olympic champion. He has all the skills. He has been training like crazy for many years. Well, he has the skill to win that race in the first attempt or in the second. But most other athletes, they will take years to develop that. And that means your perspective for the race should also be different. I mean, if everyone goes in for the win, 90% will struggle or 59% will struggle. I mean, but it's also like I'm European and Scandinavian, so I'm maybe a little bit more conservative on expectations. If you're like the American way is like, well, everyone can be a world star and everyone thinks they can win everything. And that has been interesting when I've been coaching American athletes that the ones that I have success with is like the ones that are more maybe mentally in a European style.
Right.
Huh?
Right.
So it's again about what does fit together.
Yeah. That's very interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
Matching the mentalities. Yeah.
Yeah, matching the mentality. Of course, it has to be different to be fruitful also, but if the difference is too big, then it won't work out in the long run.
Speaking of Kona, when a question comes up up a lot with development athletes or elites, depending how you consider of it, is when is a good decision? When is a good time to race Kona? Given the qualifying process which we talked about, at what point is it a good decision? Given where the prize money works and the investment to do it, the opportunity cost, you can only race so many Ironmans in a year, so you have to decide which ones they're going to be. I'm sure you've been through this process before with some of the athletes on the path up. How have you dealt with that question? When is the right time to have a go at Kona?
Yeah, this topic is up every time with every long distance athlete. But my approach is that I say I wouldn't send anyone to Kona or try to qualify for Kona if they have not a realistic potential to do the top 10. Because like Kona is all about the top 10. So if you are 11th, you have spent whatever, $5, $6, $7, $8,000 for nothing because you don't get any prize money. The sponsors are not interested. So Kona is very much like top 10 is great, even though maybe still if you are a top guy or top girl and you normally would say you are doing top 5, but if you're 10th, you still get $10,000 and you get some of the attention. But as soon as you're 11th, it's hell of a race.
Sure. I think I had the 11th place guy this year too.
Yeah.
Tell me about it.
So in his case, it might be different because he got a contract on that.
That's true.
Because it was his first time, more or less, his first season in long distance. So somebody could see, well, there's potential. And so then the story maybe is different. But like there are so many guys and girls going for Kona year after year and not getting into the top 10. And it doesn't make any sense. I mean, it's about motivation also and expectations. The way I look at it is you get motivation when your expectations are fulfilled. So if you have high expectations and they are not fulfilled, well, you will get a little bit of depression afterwards. So there are many having after Kona blues, as many as are having an after Olympics blues. But Olympics is only every 4th year. Yeah, Kona is every year. So that's good and that's bad. I mean, you have a new opportunity every year, but you can get disappointed every year. Olympics is different. You have the hopes for 4 years, and then you only get disappointed once, and have to take a decision. Yeah.
Indeed, that's interesting. And speaking of the teams, David McNamee was the athlete that was 11th, and now he's on the BMC ethics team. I'm not coaching David for the next year, but you're right, that did work out for him. But speaking of those teams, what do you think about those teams? Because there's a few now in long distance racing, and maybe BMC ethics is different because they do operate as a team sometimes, where other teams are more just a sponsorship kind of team. But what do you think about that? Is there a future there? Is there a parallel with, we were talking about the international squads, or how do you see that?
It's very much different to what is going on in ITU racing and having like squads which are training together for very long periods of the year. Like the long distance teams, it's more sponsor based. So it's about making a living for the athletes. And there's somebody having some interest in that. They have something to offer the athletes, and they are sometimes well paid, sometimes maybe not so well paid, but it's a totally different story. But it will continue. I mean, it's more like cycling. There's somebody interested in having the advertising opportunity and putting, well, some money in it, and they will last as long as the sponsors are happy. And if they are not happy anymore, well, the group a new sponsor. And but I think for the athletes in general, it makes it, of course, in the situation you get a salary, it makes it easier. You will have less challenges in the financial way. Well, you have more obligations then. You have to wear the team sponsors, whatever, and you might get offered other sponsors that you have to turn down. And there are other topics, other problems coming up, but most of the teams are not training together for more than 2 weeks of a year. So it's different.
Do you think that that's something that more long distance athletes should do? Should they train in groups, or is really the demand so different that individual training? I mean, we've seen individual training or very small groups is very effective. That's the model that many long distance champions have used. But what do you think is that a trick that's being missed in some respects by long distance athletes, or is it actually the right way to train individually or in small groups?
I think for most it's fruitful to train together with others for some periods, maybe not all the time. I mean, you can also get confused by comparing yourself to others all the time. I mean, there are times where it's very good information to know, well, I'm definitely slower than my training companion. And other times you don't want to know that, but because it's maybe going to make you depressed and to make you do the wrong choices. I mean, training is very much about doing choices, more or less every day. And coaching is about like helping the athletes to do the right choices, and more or less all the time. The more right choices you do, and the less you do of the wrong choices, the more success you will have. And I think it's very different on people what they work on best. I mean, I have athletes that are training maybe 50% of the training or 70% of the training they will do alone, but they are really happy when they have the opportunity to train with others. It's also very much dependent on, are there other athletes in the area? I mean, it's just simply different that long distance athletes, they have a base, most of them, where they live, and that's where they are. Where ITU is very much, you search for the opportunity to fulfill your potential with the group, because it makes maybe a bigger difference for the ITU athletes than for the long distance athletes for some reason. But that would take a big survey to find out why that is, because I mean, there has been and there will always be individual long distance athletes that have a very small team around them, like whatever, a physio and a coach, and maybe one or two athletes that are maybe not the same level, but help them out in training to give them whatever company. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, we're in Fuerteventura, and we've seen both Freddie Van Lierde come through with a similar setup with a pal to do some training with, and also Kienle last week. I think he went home a couple of days ago, but he also had a pal or two to swim and ride with and run with. So that kind of small group model, and I mean. Certainly there's the obvious stuff with the I2 athletes being able to do tactics and skills training together, which, as you said, is, less relevant to the long distance athletes. But we've managed to speak for almost an hour now. We've hardly talked about training, which I think is very typical with these kind of conversations. I was thinking about, well, what would Michael want to say about training? But we've covered many different topics already that I think will be very interesting for coaches. So maybe we wrap it there and we speak another time about training, because I think you'd have lots of interesting things to say there too. But thanks for taking the time for the chat. I think many people will find it very interesting, and it's interesting to hear about perspective from somebody that's been in the sport for so long with so much success. That always look for people to learn from that are serially successful over long periods, because there's got to be something that they're doing well. So I think you've got some of that history and that success with many different kinds of athletes.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me. And actually, I started listening to your podcasting when it started out while driving. I'm having a job at a university, a part-time job at the moment, which makes me drive a lot, and it'd be really enjoyable to listen to the other podcasts, and I will continue for that. And yeah, what you say, it's very interesting to talk to other coaches. Because you always learn, and you get some different perspectives on things, and take something to the next, to take you to the next level, and to try some things out with your athletes that maybe you didn't think of was possible or was an option. So thank you very much to having me on the show.
Indeed. And if people want to follow you or get in contact with you, what's the best way to follow you or get in contact?
Yeah, I don't do that much advertising, but I have a Facebook, the Kruger Coaching Facebook page, where I put something up from time to time, also from this. That's the best way, and then just send a message or phone, then it's going on from there.
Perfect. Well, we'll put a link in the notes to that, and yeah, I mean, with a few of the coaches we've talked to, don't necessarily have a big social media or presence or anything like that, but I think these are the most interesting people to talk to, because they're authentically working in coaching day to day, and I think that now that's part of the mission of what we're trying to do is to have those kind of conversations with coaches like yourself. And so thanks very much again, and we'll be in contact, and maybe we do another one sometime in the future with a training talk.
Whenever you want, it would be a pleasure. And have a good training camp, and I will prepare for some more skiing tomorrow.
What did you get from the interview? What were the main points that you took away?
I liked a lot of it. He brings us real coaching perspective on the sport. I think that both on Ironman, but also ITU. So he kind of he's on top of things. He's been doing this for a long time, so he's got his philosophy down and the way he works down. And I felt that was pretty interesting. I think he said some things that we said before, or we talked about before, which is, training is all about choices, about making decisions, about helping athletes making the correct decisions, and I think a lot of times that's what it comes down to. So I thought that was interesting. Some stuff also was interesting from more like a private point of view, not private, but kind of like he has coached a few of your current athletes. He has coached a few athletes that we know. So it was kind of like interesting to hear from him.
Yeah, I mean, for sure. As you said, he's been around a long time, coached a lot of different kinds of athletes, and from long distance and pretty solid short distance. I mean, certainly, Rasmus winning high V. Did he win twice? He won the big prize twice, didn't he? That was stuck in my mind. That was big memory. And then I mean, many different influences. He didn't take a lot of credit for Denmark, but I think Denmark's success. But I think he's had a really big influence there over the years. And I mean, I found that as you say, the sort of personal side. I mean, I found the transition, from taking on Hele in those years and even coming back with Jordan pretty smooth, because I think we share some basic philosophy stuff about how to work with athletes and prepare. So from that point of view, obviously there was a link and commonalities there, and you could hear a little bit about that. Some of that is training, but some of it is, as you say, as we're talking to more people and just how we talk about coaching, you reach a point where there's some similarities in approach, because it's how do you get the most out of people, helping them make decisions, as you said, and navigate that process of self-management.
Yeah, one thing that I found that was really interesting was when he talked about the logic to have long distance athletes on the national team, and he said something like, well, in a country like Denmark, we're not going to have a large group of athletes that are going to be going to the Olympics, but we still need numbers to function as a squad. So it makes sense for us to have a squad of long distance athletes and also short course ITU athletes. And I felt that was a really good comment, because a lot of the times we see either small countries or countries that are not very deep have big squads where a bunch of the athletes are just filler there. They're just never going to be really, really good, but they're part of the squad because, and this happens most of the times, because federations like numbers and they like to have like large groups. And so you have a large group where only 1-2 athletes are good, and then the rest is never going to make it, but they're still part of the squad. And a lot of the times they take up resources, and they're just like, stuffing the pipeline, because they're familiar to people that decide funding, or one reason or the other is like, oh, this kid's been around with us forever. He never performed well, but let's give him another chance. And so I thought that his logic to just, well, we don't have a lot of athletes, so we all got them together, and that elevates the standard and the level that the national team has. And I think that was a really good comment.
Yeah, especially in the past, I've been aware of this for a long time, that Denmark operates this way, and you can think, what do they get out of this? But I think in terms of funding long distance athletes, but that's exactly what they get out of it, is they get a better quality training group, and you can get perhaps more mature, successful athletes that are doing long course working with some of the younger athletes, and in helping the culture, the environment, the way that they do things, that can be very powerful. And I think it makes a ton of sense. And when listening to Michael talk about it and where we're at now, you wonder, why isn't this happening more often? Why is there such a barrier up between short course and long course, especially for these small countries, that they don't have a lot of athletes? And in fact, really, even so-called big countries, often they don't have very many athletes involved, because we've got these policies around the world, really, where if you're not, quote unquote, on the medal contender track, then your funding and opportunities may be limited. The debate about whether that's actually the case is, a whole other one, but they often don't have very many athletes, and it's very difficult to have a fun, dynamic squad that allows athletes to improve. So I think it makes a lot of sense, and it'd be interesting to see if other outfits, other federations figure this out and try to implement it, because you coach some long distance athletes from some different countries, and really they don't get much, do they? There's not really an effort to integrate them into the
What are you talking about, Joel? Like, federations, sometimes they give you like a free entry for long distance worlds. Isn't that support right there? and sometimes sometimes elite athletes don't even have to buy their kit.
Sure.
So
sure.
that's just support right there, Joel. You're just being so unfair.